Picture this, if you will, the Vorthak Empire. You know, those delightfully charming folks who conquered half the galaxy by Tuesday and still had time for lunch. 8 feet tall, scales that could deflect plasma rounds, and teeth that could crack open starship hulls. The kind of species that made other civilizations wet themselves just thinking about them. Their emperor, a particularly imposing specimen named Grimjaw the Terrible, ruled from his massive dreadnought flagship that was roughly the size of a small moon. And why wouldn't it be? When you're the apex predator of the galaxy, you don't exactly shop in the compact vehicle section. Now, Emperor Grimjaw had everything a galactic tyrant could want. Conquered worlds, trembling subjects, a throne made from the bones of his enemies, and most importantly, 3 adorable little cubs who were the apple of his reptilian eye. Well, they would have been adorable if you found razor-sharp claws and the ability to bite through steel plating. Cute, which Grimjaw absolutely did. But here's where our story gets interesting, because even apex predators have bad days, and Grimjaw was having the worst day of his considerably long and violent life. His cubs, Ripjaw, Slashfang, and Little Teartail, were dying. Not from battle wounds, mind you. Not from some exotic space plague or assassination attempt by rival empires. No, that would have been too straightforward for the universe's twisted sense of humor. They were just wasting away, getting weaker by the day, losing their appetites, their beautiful scales dulling to a sickly gray. The Vorthak's medical staff, the absolute pinnacle of galactic healing technology, were completely baffled. Chief Medical Officer Tentaclius Prime, a squid-like being with more degrees than a thermometer and an ego to match, had thrown everything at the problem. Quantum cellular regenerators, molecular DNA restructuring, nanomedical bots that cost more than some planet's GDP. Nothing worked. Your imperial terrifyingness, Tentaclius Prime gurgled through his translator, his 17 tentacles writhing in what could charitably be called medical anxiety. We have exhausted all conventional treatments. Perhaps we should consider unconventional options. Grimjaw's roar shook the medical bay. Several junior medics fainted. What are you suggesting, Doctor? Tentaclius Prime's skin changed to a pale green, which in his species indicated either deep thought or severe nausea. There is one option, though it pains me to suggest it. We could consult with one of the primitive species. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Primitive species. The humans, Your Terrifying Majesty. They have a practitioner, a veterinarian they call him. Dr. Marcus Webb. He tends to their domestic animals using what they laughingly call medicine. Grimjaw's massive head tilted. Their animals? Yes, sire. Apparently they have creatures they keep purely for emotional attachment. Bizarre, I know. But this Webb individual has gained something of a reputation for treating challenging cases, even when our advanced medicine has failed. You could practically hear Grimjaw's dignity taking a beating. The ruler of half the galaxy reduced to calling in a human-animal doctor, a species so primitive they still used chemical combustion to power their vehicles, and hadn't even figured out proper matter transmission yet. But then he looked at his cubs, barely breathing in their medical pods, and his paternal instincts overrode his imperial pride. Contact this Webb human immediately. Tentaclius Prime's tentacles drooped. I have already taken the liberty, Your Terrifying Magnificence. He should arrive within the standard rotation. And so it was that the most feared predator in the galaxy found himself waiting for a human veterinarian with a medical bag that probably contained tools that would make a Vorthak warrior laugh. The same species that still thought antibiotics were high technology and performed surgery with metal knives like absolute barbarians. What could possibly go wrong? Dr. Marcus Webb stepped off the transport shuttle and into the Vorthak flagship's docking bay, carrying what appeared to be a leather medical bag that looked older than some civilizations. The bag was worn, patched in several places, and contained what could generously be described as the most primitive medical equipment this side of the Stone Age. The reception committee was, shall we say, less than impressed. Tentaclius Prime floated forward, his tentacles arranged in what Webb had learned was the galactic equivalent of barely concealed disgust. Dr. Webb, I presume? I am Chief Medical Officer Tentaclius Prime, holder of 17 advanced degrees in xenobiology, quantum medicine, and molecular reconstruction. Webb adjusted his baseball hat and grinned. Nice to meet you, Doc. I'm Marcus. I fix sick animals. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. Several Vorthak guards exchanged glances that clearly said, "This is our savior?" This hairless ape with the fabric hat? Yes. Well, Tentaclius Prime's skin shifted through several shades of uncomfortable purple. I should mention that our medical facilities are somewhat more advanced than what you might be accustomed to on your quaint little world. Webb looked around at the medical bay, which resembled something between a spaceship engine room and a disco. Holographic displays showed incomprehensible data streams, machines hummed with enough energy to power a small city, and the whole place had that distinctive smell of ozone and superiority complex. Fancy, Webb said, completely unimpressed. Where are the patients? Tentaclius Prime gestured with 4 tentacles toward the medical pods where 3 small Vorthak cubs lay motionless. As you can see, we have employed our most advanced life support systems, quantum-entangled cellular stabilizers, nanogenerative matrices, and— "Hold up there, Professor Squidward," Webb interrupted, setting his ancient bag down with a satisfying thump. "Before you dazzle me with more 50-credit words, how about you tell me what these little guys actually ate yesterday?" The question seemed to physically pain Tentaclius Prime. "We have conducted extensive molecular analysis of their nutritional intake. Every element has been precisely calculated for optimal metabolic efficiency." "That's not what I asked." Webb was already pulling on latex gloves that looked positively prehistoric compared to the energy field hand protection the aliens used. "What did they eat?" "The finest synthesized nutrients available in the galaxy, calibrated to their exact genetic requirements and before they got sick." Another pause. "The same optimal nutrition formula." Webb was now pulling what appeared to be an actual stethoscope out of his bag. Several Vorthak medics backed away in horror as if he'd drawn a weapon. "And how long have they been on this space-aged baby formula?" "Since weaning, approximately 4 standard rotations ago." "Right." Webb approached the first cub, completely ignoring the fact that, even unconscious, baby Vortak were capable of accidentally removing limbs. "Mind if I take a look at them? You know, with my barbarically primitive examination techniques." Tentaclius Prime's tentacles writhed in what Webb was beginning to recognize as barely controlled medical anxiety. "Dr. Webb, I must stress that these are not your typical Earth-domesticated animals. These are Vorthak cubs, apex predators with physiologies far more complex than anything your rustic medicine has encountered." "Yeah, I gathered that from the whole scales and fangs thing," Webb replied, gently placing his stethoscope on the first cub's chest. "Pretty quiet in there. Heart rate's low, breathing's shallow. Classic presentation." "Classic presentation of what?" Tentaclius Prime demanded. "We have run every conceivable diagnostic protocol." Webb moved to the second cub, his examination quick but thorough in a way that made the alien medical staff deeply uncomfortable. Here was a human, using tools that belonged in a museum, examining patients with nothing more than his hands, eyes, and ears. It was like watching someone try to perform surgery with a butter knife. "Tell me something, Doc," Webb said, moving to examine Little Teartail. "In all your advanced medical training, did anyone ever teach you about transitional feeding protocols for carnivorous species?" The color that Tentaclius Prime turned wasn't found anywhere in nature. It was the color of a medical professional realizing they might have missed something very, very basic. That is to say, our nutritional synthesis algorithms are based on the most advanced understanding of metabolic requirements." Webb stood up and fixed the alien doctor with a look that somehow managed to be both amused and deeply disappointed. "That's a no, then." Emperor Grimjaw, who had been watching this exchange with growing interest, stepped forward. His voice was a low rumble that made the deck plates vibrate. "Human Webb, you have found something my medical staff has not?" Webb looked up at the towering Emperor without a trace of fear, which impressed even the Vorthak guards. "Well, your Imperial scaliness, I've got good news and bad news." Grimjaw's eyes, each the size of dinner plates, fixed on the small human. "Speak." "The good news is, your kids aren't dying from some exotic space disease or genetic disorder or quantum flux imbalance or whatever other 50-syllable nightmare your medical team was worried about." Tentaclius Prime's tentacles began writhing faster. "And the bad news?" Webb's grin was the kind that made people nervous. "The bad news is that you've been slowly starving them to death with the most expensive baby food in the galaxy." The medical bay fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the next solar system. Several junior medics stopped breathing entirely. Tentaclius Prime turned a color that didn't exist on the visible spectrum. That is impossible," the alien doctor sputtered. Our nutritional synthesis provides optimal macro and micronutrients calculated to the molecular level, every vitamin, mineral, and amino acid required for proper Vorthak development. Webb pulled out what appeared to be an honest-to-goodness magnifying glass and examined one of the cub's claws. And tell me, in all that molecular-level perfection, did anyone think to include roughage? Roughage? Tentaclius Prime said the word like it personally offended him. Fiber. Indigestible plant matter. The stuff that makes digestion actually work. Webb straightened up and looked around at the assembled medical staff like a teacher addressing a class of particularly slow students. See, back on Earth, we figured out a long time ago that predators don't just eat the muscle meat of their prey. They eat the whole animal, including the stomach contents, which, in case anyone's wondering, includes partially digested plant matter. The silence was deafening. You could practically hear the sound of advanced medical degrees crumbling. That's ridiculous, one of the junior medics squeaked. Vorthak are obligate carnivores. They have no requirement for plant matter. Webb's laugh echoed through the medical bay. Right, and I suppose their natural prey in the wild just happened to be conveniently deboned and filleted before they ate it. Tentaclius Prime was now cycling through colors that would have made a rainbow jealous. The nutritional requirements are clearly established in the xenobiological literature. Vorthak physiology requires high-protein, high-fat nutrition with specific amino acid profiles, which your fancy space food provides, Webb interrupted. But what it doesn't provide is the mechanical stimulation needed for proper digestive function. These little guys have been eating pre-digested mush for months. Their digestive systems are shutting down from lack of use. He gestured to the cubs with what appeared to be a tongue depressor that probably belonged in a museum. Look at their gums, pale, inflamed. Check their abdominal distension. Classic signs of malnutrition despite adequate caloric intake. Emperor Grimjaw leaned in closer, his massive form casting shadows across the medical pods. You are certain of this diagnosis? As certain as I am that someone decided to feed apex predators the galactic equivalent of baby formula for their entire lives. Webb was now pulling out what looked suspiciously like a regular thermometer. Tell me something. Your terrifyingness. What did you eat as a cub? Grimjaw's expression grew distant, nostalgic. Live, pray. Fresh kills. The way of our people for millennia. And how were those kills prepared? We're not prepared. We consumed them whole, as nature intended. Webb nodded sagely. Bones, organs, stomach contents and all. Yes, of course, it is the natural way. Tentaclius Prime looked like he was about to have an existential crisis. But surely modern nutritional science has improved upon such primitive feeding practices. Oh, it has, Webb agreed cheerfully. It's improved them right into malnutrition. You've taken everything that made their natural diet work and refined it away. It's like taking a perfectly good engine and removing all the parts you think are unnecessary, then wondering why it won't start. The Emperor's roar of frustration rattled the entire medical bay. How is this possible? We have the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy! Webb was now listening to the second cub's heartbeat with his antique stethoscope, completely unfazed by the imperial tantrum. Sometimes the most advanced technology is knowing when not to use it. Your docs here have been treating the symptoms with increasingly complex solutions, while completely missing the obvious cause. The obvious cause? Tentaclius Prime's voice had reached a pitch that was probably illegal in several star systems. Yep, your kids need real food, not space-age nutrition paste, not molecularly perfect protein shakes, not quantum-enhanced vitamin supplements. They need to crunch some bones, tear some meat, and work their digestive systems the way evolution designed them to work. Webb stood up and faced the assembled medical staff with the confidence of someone who knew he was absolutely right. It's like this, folks. You can calculate the perfect nutritional requirements all you want, but if you don't understand how the system is supposed to work, all you're doing is expensive guesswork. The implications were staggering. The most advanced medical minds in the galaxy had been outsmarted by basic veterinary knowledge. It was like discovering that the cure for a rare disease was drinking more water. Emperor Grimjaw looked at his dying cubs, then at the small human who had just diagnosed their condition, with tools that belonged in a historical display. Dr. Webb, can you save them? Webb grinned and opened his ancient medical bag wider. Your imperial nastiness, I thought you'd never ask. What Dr. Marcus Webb pulled out of his bag next would have made a medieval surgeon proud and a modern alien doctor faint. An honest-to-goodness bone saw, not a quantum molecular tissue separator, not a plasma field surgical instrument, not even a laser scalpel. A manual bone saw that looked like it had been forged sometime during the Bronze Age. Tentaclius Prime made a sound that could charitably be described as medical horror. What? What is that barbaric implement? This? Webb held up the saw like it was perfectly normal. This is how we're going to save your cubs. Well, this and some good old-fashioned common sense. You cannot seriously intend to use that primitive torture device on Imperial offspring. Webb's eyebrows shot up. Torture device? Doc, this is a bone saw. It cuts bones. That's literally its only job, and it's been doing that job since before your species figured out fire. Emperor Grimjaw watched this exchange with fascination. Here was a human, smaller than his smallest toe claw, casually discussing surgery on his children, with tools that looked like they belonged in a museum. Explain your treatment protocol, Dr. Webb. Gladly, your royal reptiliness. Webb was now pulling out what appeared to be actual gauze bandages. The alien medical staff recoiled as if he'd drawn a weapon of mass destruction. First, we're going to get these little guys off the space-age baby formula immediately. No more liquid nutrition, no more pre-digested protein paste, no more molecularly perfect anything. But without proper nutritional support, they'll surely perish, one of the junior medics squeaked. They're already perishing on your proper nutritional support, Webb pointed out with devastating logic. Second, we're going to introduce some real food, and by real food, I mean stuff they actually have to chew. Webb reached into his bag and pulled out what looked like a collection of bones wrapped in butcher paper. The alien medical staff took several steps back, as if he'd produced a live grenade. Are those actual animal remains? Tentaclius Prime's voice had gone up approximately 3 octaves. Yep, fresh beef bones from Earth. Still got some meat on them, still got some marrow inside, and most importantly, still require actual digestive work to process. Webb unwrapped the bones with the care of someone handling precious artifacts. This is what proper carnivore nutrition looks like. The horror on the alien doctors' faces was palpable. Here was their colleague, if you could call him that, proposing to feed raw, unprocessed animal parts to patients in critical condition. It was like watching someone suggest treating a heart attack with leeches. This is insanity, Tentaclius Prime declared. Raw organic matter contains countless pathogens, parasites, and contamination risks. Our sterilization protocols alone require 17 different decontamination procedures. Webb looked at him with the patience of a kindergarten teacher explaining colors to a particularly slow child. And that's exactly the problem. You've sterilized all the life right out of their food. These aren't lab rats in sterile cages. They're apex predators, whose digestive systems evolved to handle raw meat, bones, and yes, even a few bacteria. He turned to Emperor Grimjaw, completely ignoring the medical staff's collective nervous breakdown. Your imperial toothiness. I'm going to need you to make a decision here. Either trust your advanced medical team to continue doing what they've been doing, or trust a primitive human-animal doctor to treat your kids like the predators they are. The Emperor's gaze moved between his dying cubs and the small human holding prehistoric medical tools. What are the risks of your treatment? Webb shrugged. Same as any medical treatment. Could work, could make things worse. But here's the thing. You're scaling us. What they've been doing is definitely making things worse. At least my way gives them a fighting chance. This is medical malpractice of the highest order. Tentaclius Prime's tentacles were now writhing so fast they were creating their own weather system. You propose to undo months of carefully calibrated treatment with veterinary barbarism? Veterinary barbarism that's kept animals healthy for thousands of years, Webb countered, while your carefully calibrated treatment has been slowly killing them for months. He pulled out what appeared to be a simple feeding tube, not an advanced nasogastric delivery system, not a molecular nutrition injector, just a rubber tube that probably cost less than the alien equivalent of $5. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with some bone broth. And by that I mean actual broth made from actual bones, not synthetic protein solution. We're going to stimulate their digestive systems gradually, introduce some beneficial bacteria, and get their guts working the way nature intended. The alien medical staff looked like they were witnessing the end of civilization. To them, this was like watching someone try to fix a quantum computer with a hammer. See, the contamination risks alone, another medic whispered, are minimal compared to the risk of doing nothing, Webb finished. Look, folks, I know this is hard for you to accept. You've got more advanced technology than my entire planet. But sometimes the answer isn't more complex. It's simpler. Emperor Grimjaw made a sound that was probably his species' equivalent of a deep sigh. Dr. Webb, Begin your treatment. The collective gasp from the medical staff could have powered a small space station. Tentaclius Prime turned a color that definitely wasn't found in nature and probably violated several laws of physics. Your Imperial Majesty, I must protest in the strongest possible terms. Your protest is noted and ignored, Grimjaw grumbled. Dr. Webb, you have my full authorization. If my cubs die under your primitive care, at least they will die as Vorthak should, fed as predators, not as laboratory specimens. Webb nodded and rolled up his sleeves. All right then, your royal nastiness. Let's show your medical team how we used to do things back in the old days. He picked up his bone saw and grinned. Who wants to learn some ancient earth medicine? The silence that followed was the sound of an entire advanced medical paradigm having an existential crisis. 12 hours later, the Vorthek flagship's medical bay looked like a cross between a veterinary clinic and a medieval kitchen. Webb had commandeered half the facility, setting up what he cheerfully called his Stone Age treatment center, while the alien medical staff huddled in the corner, occasionally making distressed noises. The bone broth was simmering in what used to be a sterile specimen container, filling the air with an aroma that made Emperor Grimjaw's nostrils flare with recognition. For the first time in months, the scent of real food permeated the medical bay instead of the antiseptic smell of processed nutrition. Status report, Dr. Webb, Grimjaw commanded, though his voice carried less of its usual imperial authority and more of the anxiety of a worried father. Webb looked up from where he was carefully feeding bone broth to little Ripjaw through his primitive feeding tube. The cub's eyes were open for the first time in days, and there was a faint flush of color returning to his scales. Well, your imperial worryingness, I've got some pretty good news. Ripjaw here just managed to keep down his first meal in weeks without any of your fancy anti-nausea medications. Tentaclius Prime floated closer, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested he was having trouble processing what he was seeing. That's impossible. His digestive system was completely compromised. Our quantum-stabilized nutrition delivery couldn't work because you were trying to fix a mechanical problem with chemical solutions, Webb interrupted, gently stroking the cub's head as he fed him. This little guy's gut just needed something to actually digest, something that would make his system work, instead of bypassing it entirely. At the second treatment station, Slashfang was making soft, chirping sounds as he gnawed on a specially prepared bone that Webb had scored with his ancient bone saw. The cub's jaw muscles, weak from months of liquid nutrition, were slowly remembering how to work. The improvement in muscle tone is remarkable, admitted one of the junior medics, who had overcome his horror enough to actually observe the treatment. His jaw strength has increased measurably in just hours. That's because he's using muscles he hasn't used in months, Webb explained, checking on little Teartail, who was managing to sit up in her medical pod for the first time since becoming ill. Predators need to hunt, kill, and tear their food. When you take that away, you're not just removing nutrition, you're removing essential physical and neurological stimulation. Tentaclius Prime was now cycling through colors that would have made a kaleidoscope jealous. His scientific worldview was undergoing what could charitably be called a complete reconstruction. But our analysis showed perfect nutritional delivery, every micronutrient, every vitamin, everything except the stuff that actually matters, Webb finished. You know what the difference is between your space-age nutrition and real food? Real food fights back. It makes the body work for it. And that work is what keeps the system healthy. Emperor Grimjaw watched his cubs showing more life than they had in months, and something that might have been wonder crossed his massive features. In our arrogance, we believed we had improved upon nature itself. Nature's had a few billion years to work out the kinks, Webb said, scratching behind Teartail's newly alert ears. Tends to know what it's doing. The problem with advanced civilizations is that sometimes you get so smart you forget the basics. He stood up and faced the assembled medical staff, bone broth still dripping from his primitive ladle. Look, I'm not saying technology is bad. Your medical scanners are incredible, your life support systems are amazing, and I couldn't even begin to understand half the stuff in here. But sometimes the answer isn't more technology. It's remembering why the old ways worked in the first place. Slashfang managed a weak but definitely predatory growl as he worried at his bone, and Webb grinned. There we go. That's the sound of a healthy carnivore. Tentaclius Prime floated closer to examine the cubs, his scientific curiosity finally overriding his professional embarrassment. The rate of improvement is unprecedented. In 12 hours, you've accomplished what our most advanced treatments failed to achieve in months. Because I treated the cause instead of the symptoms, Webb explained. You guys were so focused on providing perfect nutrition that you forgot about perfect digestion. It's like having the world's most advanced car and forgetting to put gas in it. The Emperor's laugh was a sound like boulders rolling down a mountainside. Dr. Webb, you have accomplished something that the greatest medical minds in the galaxy could not. You have saved my cubs, with nothing more than bones and broth. Webb wiped his hands on a towel that probably hadn't been manufactured in this century. Sometimes the best medicine is the simplest medicine, your imperial hugeness. A little food, a little common sense, and the wisdom to know when not to overthink things. Ripjaw managed to lift his head and look directly at his father for the first time in weeks. The little growl he produced was weak, but it was pure Vorthak predator. Emperor Grimjaw's eyes actually misted over. The irony, Tentaclius Prime said quietly, is that we had become so advanced, we had forgotten the fundamentals of biology itself. Webb packed up his ancient tools with the satisfaction of a job well done. That's the thing about fundamentals, Doc. They're fundamental for a reason. You can dress them up with quantum this and molecular that, but at the end of the day, a hungry carnivore is still a hungry carnivore. He looked around at the medical staff, who were now observing the cubs with something approaching awe. The good news is, you've got the best medical technology in the galaxy. The better news is, now you know when not to use it. As if to emphasize his point, all three cubs managed to produce proper Vorthak snarls simultaneously. The sound echoed through the medical bay like a promise of terror to come. Webb smiled. Music to my ears. 3 months later, Dr. Marcus Webb found himself in what could only be described as the most ridiculous situation of his veterinary career. He was standing in the grand throne room of the Vorthak flagship, wearing his usual baseball cap and jeans, while Emperor Grimjaw the Terrible formally presented him with the Order of the Golden Fang, the highest honor the Vorthak Empire could bestow. The cubs, now fully recovered and properly terrifying, sat at their father's feet looking like the apex predators they were born to be. Ripjaw had grown 6 inches and developed a bite force that could crack titanium. Slashfang could now leap 12 feet vertically and had mastered the art of the intimidating snarl. Little Teartail had discovered she could camouflage herself almost perfectly, which had led to several heart-stopping moments for the palace staff. Dr. Marcus Webb, Grimjaw intoned, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority, for services to the Vorthak Empire beyond measure, for wisdom that surpassed our greatest minds, and for saving the future heirs of our people, we declare you Honorary Vorthak and Supreme Veterinary Advisor to the Empire. Webb accepted the massive golden medal, which was roughly the size of a dinner plate and probably worth more than his entire hometown. Thanks, Your Imperial Scaliness. Though I have to ask, does this come with health insurance? The laughter that erupted from the assembled Vorthak nobility was the sound of a species learning to appreciate human humor. It was terrifying, in the best possible way. What made the whole situation even more absurd was the line of alien medical professionals now waiting outside the throne room. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the human veterinarian who had accomplished the impossible with primitive tools and common sense. Tentaclius Prime, who had undergone something of a professional renaissance since the cub's recovery, floated forward with what appeared to be a scroll made of some exotic material. Dr. Webb, on behalf of the Galactic Medical Consortium, I am authorized to offer you a position as Chief Consultant for Fundamental Medical Practices. Webb raised an eyebrow. Fundamental Medical Practices? We've created an entirely new department, Tentaclius Prime explained, his tentacles writhing with what Webb had learned was excitement rather than anxiety. Based on your illuminating demonstration, we've realized that perhaps we've been overthinking certain aspects of medical care. You mean like the part where you forgot that carnivores need to actually eat meat instead of drinking protein shakes? Among other things, yes. The alien doctor's skin shifted to a color that indicated professional humility, which was apparently a very rare shade. We've begun reviewing centuries of medical literature to identify other instances where we may have over-engineered our solutions. Emperor Grimjaw leaned forward on his throne, which was still made from the bones of his enemies, but now also had a small side table holding a bowl of Webb's homemade bone broth. Dr. Webb has shown us that true advancement sometimes requires looking backward to move forward. Webb scratched his head under his baseball cap. I just treated some sick animals with food and common sense. It's not exactly rocket science. That, said a new voice from the back of the throne room, is precisely why it's so revolutionary. The speaker was Ambassador Zylok of the Crystalline Confederation, a species that looked like living gemstones and had medical technology that could literally rewrite DNA in real time. Dr. Webb, my people have studied your methods and applied them to our own medical practices. We've seen a 30% improvement in treatment outcomes simply by asking ourselves, what would the human do, before implementing complex solutions. Webb was beginning to feel like he'd accidentally started a galactic medical revolution. Look, I appreciate all the recognition, but I'm just a small-town vet who likes fixing sick animals. Exactly! Tentaclius Prime's excitement was now generating its own light show. You approach medical problems without the burden of preconceived complexity. You see simple solutions where we see opportunities for technological advancement. Ripjaw, who had been quietly gnawing on what appeared to be a small spacecraft component, looked up at Webb and made a sound that was probably affection but sounded like a diesel engine gargling gravel. Webb reached down to scratch behind the cub's ears, a gesture that still made half the alien dignitaries nervous. The funny thing is, Webb said, back on Earth I'm just another country veterinarian, nothing special. But apparently in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations, being able to recognize that sick carnivores need real meat is considered groundbreaking medical insight. Emperor Grimjaw's laugh shook the throne room. Perhaps that says more about the galaxy than it does about you, Dr. Webb. Maybe so, your imperial nastiness. Maybe so. As the ceremony concluded and the various alien dignitaries began filing out to spread the word about the revolutionary human medical techniques, Webb found himself holding a medal that declared him the most sought-half-eyed veterinarian in known space. His appointment book was now managed by an AI system that could process requests from 17 different galaxies simultaneously. But the best part, he reflected, as he watched the 3 healthy Vorthak cubs play fighting with enough force to level a small building, was that somewhere in the galaxy, alien medical students were now learning the ancient art of asking simple questions like, "What did the patient eat yesterday?" and "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Well, maybe not that last one. But the principle was sound. Teartail successfully ambushed one of the palace guards, who screamed in surprise before remembering that this was now considered a sign of healthy cub development. Webb grinned and adjusted his baseball cap. Sometimes the most advanced medicine in the galaxy was just knowing when to keep things simple. And if that made him the most famous veterinarian in the universe, well, he supposed there were worse ways to make a living. Besides, the pay was fantastic, and he'd never run out of interesting cases. After all, it was a big galaxy, and apparently everyone in it had forgotten how to feed their pets properly.